Super 8 cameras and why I think you should have one in your film kit. It's gonna be your cheapest camera probably in your kit, and it could have possibly the biggest impact if you use it in the right applications. In this video, I'm gonna go over basic information like what is 50D, what is 500T, the do's and don'ts, things to look for, how to get it processed, the pricing, basic stuff like that, and then also why I shoot on it, showing examples from my own personal work, kind of a fun little laid back chill sesh. Pour yourself a cup of coffee, maybe some tea, smoke a doobie, whatever, throw in some lo-fi, and let's get into it. I don't know when, but there'll be a timestamp. If you don't really care or you know all the basic information like what 50D film stock is, then you can skip to this number, put in the annotations, and if not, let's get into it. The basics of the camera. So you have a click and shoot, right? So you have the record, you have record lock, no finger on the trigger. You shoot at a standard 18 frames per second. That's what, if you were to play it in a projector, that would be the playback. You also have 24 on some cameras. Also, some other cameras have a little higher. This is just the camera I have, which is the Canon 814 electric for the power zoom. Most have a power zoom, but we'll get to that later. So you have 18, 24, and single frame. 18 frames per second, 24 frames per second, and single frame if you wanted to do stop motion. And you also have slow motion, which is, high speed. Really ripping. So then you also have a manual or auto. A lot of these times people will shoot on auto. There was an issue for a lot of these cameras, especially this model. The manual breaks very easily because it's just a little kind of thin string in there. And so if it's working, you pull this out and then you can adjust the f-stop, which you'll see a little light meter. Let's see if I can get a picture put up front, but there's a little light meter on the top. If not, and it's in auto, it'll just move, and it's pretty reliable, depending on your camera, which we'll get into later. On this top, you have a power zoom. The zoom range for most cameras is usually gonna be between 5, 7.5, all the way up to 60, 80. So a nice full range. This lens is attached directly, it's not interchangeable. And again, going back to the meat and potatoes mom, this was meant to be a thing that you kept in your bag, you pulled out, you didn't need to fuss, you didn't need to bust. It was just a go get it camera. And that's what makes it beautiful. In the back, mine, I don't know, let's see if you can see that, but there's some pins back there, there's 6. And so that means that basically I can use more ranging of film stocks, because how the film stock works for Super 8 is it's a cartridge and it has kind of like little points on it. I'll show a picture right here. And you put it in and it kind of talks to the pins, this 60s technology. And that will relay what film stock and what ISO it is. So your autofocus can relay that and accurately call what the f-stop is, because there's no button on here to change your ISO manually. So depending on the pins that you have will determine how accurate your auto exposure, your f-stop changing will be. You want to make sure that your camera has at least a few pins than just a single pin, because then you'll be limited to 50D, 200D. Let's talk about film stock. There's color negative and there's color positive, but let's start with the color negative, because that's going to be the normal stock that you're going to use. There are 50D, 100D, 200T, and 500T, and I think there might be a 250. I forget exactly all of them, but basically the basic rundown is 50D is your finest grain. It is your lowest ISO. Film stock, if you don't know, that's where ISO came from for the digital camera. So the lower the number, the less sensitive it is, the light, but also the nicer the grain. So your 50Ds are gonna be what you take to the beach, a snowy day, that kind of stuff. A 200D is gonna be a little more balanced. You can maybe do it in an overcast or sunset, or maybe in a forest or something where you're getting kind of iffy light. And the tungsten 200 and 500 are obviously for inside lighting, because it's color balanced for inside lights. You can get around shooting tungsten at outside, like during the day if you wanted to, if you happen to have that film stock. Some cameras have a orange filter that you put on top, or I guess you can do some editing within the color when you get the digital. But in general, you should use those for indoor lighting because that is what the chemical coating on the film is made for. So obviously 500 is going to be your best low light. Think bowling alleys, think bars, think, late evenings, that kind of stuff. That's kind of the basic rundown of film stocks. Now, when you're looking to buy film, you first need to think about what you're going to do. You can pull out the cartridge mid spool, but you will then expose the film that is being exposed, and you'll have kind of, an overexposed shot until you put it back in and run the reel, and you'll lose, some seconds. But when you're using a project or shooting a project, you should kind of pre-storyboard what you're doing, okay? Perfect example, I was working on a music video. There's 3 different locations, one out in a desert, one out in a forest, and one at a beach at sunset. So I used 200D because that's kind of a middling, pretty latitude. It was a color negative, which, just a note, color negative versus color positive. Color negative has a little more latitude because of how they process it. You can kind of recover the shadows and the highlights more than a color positive, which is pretty strict. So if you know you're going to be going into a situation where you might be kind of like, ooh, I don't know if this is going to come out, definitely use a color negative film stock. From there, you buy the film. So there's multiple ways you can process the film. Well, there's technically 2. You have Pro 8mm, which is located in Burbank. If you live in Los Angeles, it's just a hop and skip up about 2 miles past Studio City going north. That Costco over there, it's in between the Costco and Universal Studios, if you're familiar with the area. Then you have also Cine Labs, which is out in New York. I've never gone to the actual place themselves, so I don't know if it's in New York proper or like out and about, but maybe you can drive to it. I'm not sure. The prices are pretty similar. Cine Lab is a little more expensive, but personally, I've had a little better customer service with them. Not that Pro 8 is bad. I just, there's one guy there that's kind of an ass. But, that doesn't mean you shouldn't shop there. I buy most of my stuff there because it's a little cheaper. It ranges in price depending on if you mail in the film or you buy their own film stock. Both companies sell film stocks. It's pretty self-explanatory, but basically it'll run you around $100 to process the film. Also, something to keep in note, they have different options when you're processing it, like oversampled, which means you can see the sidebars and the resolution. So 720, 1080, 2K, 4K, all that kind of information. And that changes the price. I recommend, in my experience, if it's a really important client shoot, 4K, the client's probably paying for it anyways. And if it's a personal shoot, 2K is probably your best bet, and you'll save some bucks there. Normally, they will upload to Google Drive, but when you do 4K, most likely there's going to be an additional charge just because the file is going to be like 30 gigs. So you can either ship them an SD card or just pay the extra, $20 or whatever. And also just one last thing about shopping at these or getting your stuff processed. If you're shooting black and white, it processes later because there's less black and white being processed. So usually there's a lead time of 30 days or so. And if you need the project to be turned around fast, but you don't want to pay the $200 rush fee, just call both places and ask, hey, when are you processing your next black and white? Because if they're processing it next week or so, you can get in on that and, rush your film for $20 via mail and save yourself $200. That's actually what I did when I first used Cine Labs. So I normally go to Pro 8 just up the street, and then I needed a turnaround, but I didn't want to pay, $150 or whatever it was. So I called Cine Labs and like, oh yeah, we're processing it next week. So if you can get it out to us within 3 days or so, we got you within the week. Overnighted it, got it in time for the project, and it was great. So that's the basic rundown. That is what a Super 8 camera is. That is what the film stocks are, and that is how to process it. There you go. But you didn't come to this video just to be bored by the information. At least I hope not. You came here to hear experiences, to talk about why I love shooting on it, and overall just to, watch my face. Super 8, why I love shooting on it. It kind of goes back to why it was created. It was made for that meat and potatoes mom that wanted to record her kids in a convenient way. And with that mindset, anytime you see Super 8 film, like no one's really shooting a feature on Super 8 unless they went out of their way to shoot a feature, or it was some indie film from the 70s and they didn't have money, so they had a Super 8 camera. Anytime you've seen Super 8, your grandparents have shot Super 8, or even your parents, there is this feeling of nostalgia that comes from shooting this, because anytime it was shot, for the most part, was that meat and potatoes mom. It was those family outings to cut down a Christmas tree, or the grandparents came in, or going to the beach, or a fun picnic, or maybe a nice church Sunday. Even though you haven't lived these experiences, there is an integral nostalgia that comes with the shaky footage, the 18 frames per second, all of the things that is Super 8 film. When you see it, you can feel it. And it's something that can add to your project that just a digital camera can't make. And that's another reason why, I bought this. It's the same kind of feeling. This is more cinema heavy, where there was actually a lot of films shot on 16 millimeter, versus this is a little more homey, but the principles apply. And so why I love it, and if I can ever get it on a shoot, like if I'm working with a client and I can convince them to use it, I always bring it up, because it is this really cool feeling that adds. You can shoot whatever, and because it's shot on Super 8 film, it just adds so much. I just recently worked on this horror film documentary. I brought the Super 8, and the whole outro was shot on Super 8, as well as just basically all the transitions in between each scene. It just adds so much texture and life to the film that if I shot all those scenes with the camera, it just wouldn't have that impact. And I'm not recommending, shooting a whole feature or a short film on something like this. It would be cool, but obviously audio and stuff like that would be just a headache to make. But having this as a complementing piece, a delicious sauce, a jus for your, your pork chop or your steak, that is what this camera is so good at doing. And at 100 to 150, depending on stock and all that stuff, you inject so much life into any project you're shooting. As an example, I shot this one music video for a musician, and the song was called The Good Times Last Forever. And in that song, it was a sorrowful ballad about these good times that last forever, but the actuality of life, meaning that it won't last forever, right? And that's kind of like the undertones of the song. And as soon as I heard the song and I talked to the musician about what his feelings are with the song, I was like, we need to shoot this on Super 8, because that nostalgia from the song matches perfectly with the nostalgia of Super 8 film.
Living off the lakes, not bad. At least you can afford that bad. Every single day we've had. Make the night go by too fast. I could cop a phone call with no rooftop. Fuck a K-pop star in a new watch, but I never want this life to end. money calling out to me. And I ain't asked for much, I swear to God. And I ain't asked for much, I swear to God. And I ain't asked for much, I swear to God. Good times never end, good times never end, good times never end, good times never end.
With that came this beautiful piece of just pure nostalgia, and at the end of editing it, I showed it to some of his friends and stuff, and like people were starting to get like even almost emotional from that shoot. And I think what I'm trying to get to is it has this transportive ability to send you to your fondest memories as a kid. When you were sick and your mom took care of you and made you tomato soup, or when you cut your knee and some bandages happen, or that vacation that just sticks with you. Whatever your nostalgic moment, when you think of family, you think of friends, you think of better times, when you watch some Super 8, it triggers that same part in your memory. And so I think it's a really powerful tool. And so what I love about Super 8 is kind of similar to what I loved about 35mm film on a camera. It's the wait to see what you got. It's the having to use the mistakes that you have. It is the composition and the rehearsal that you need to do. It is the texture, the feel, the nostalgia that comes from shooting on film. We all live in a digital age. I'm not gonna lie and pretend like, oh, I grew up on developing film, but it is a part of the history of filmmaking, and you should know where the digital age came from, right? This is something that should be used as a tool like any other camera, and I think it's super important and one of my favorite pieces in my gear bag. You know, looking over at my shelves and all my cameras, these two pieces of equipment are some of my favorite pieces to use because it helps you stand out as a filmmaker. Everyone can make beautiful images. We're spoiled by beautiful images coming out day in and day out. You know, your iPhone now can make beautiful images. So going back to using a Super 8, a Super 16, something that can help separate you from the crowd will be even more of a usefulness in today's age. And it's something I think you should really consider. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you maybe will now consider looking into Super 8, and I would love to hear your experiences if you go on and buy one or you have one, and share your stories. I hope this video came of some use, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.
Good times last forever. Never turn back, make the nine go straight. Shooting no cap, I'ma miss these days. And it ain't like that, guess it's all gon' fade away. And I still just want the good life. Don't care if I fade away.